Hello, this is Dr. Peter Drews. This is a quick video of a Class 4 restoration that we recently completed in my office. The patient presented herself from the local emergency room where unfortunately she slipped, fell, and broke her number 8 Class 4 lesion. It was an Ellis Class 2 fracture, was into the dentin, but no issues with the pulp. So what I'm doing here is just removing the glass ionometer restoration that the emergency room placed to protect her dentin, and she presented for us to give her a direct restoration. I apologize for the camera work. This was kind of a last minute idea to record this. So at this step, what I'm doing is just adding a bevel to the buccal surface of number 8. This way, by adding the bevel, it's a much easier way to blend in the restorative material with the natural. Also, as everyone knows, that your highest strength of bond is with enamel. So by doing the bevel, you're increasing the surface area to bond to. So that's what I'm doing at this point. So what I'm looking at this point is the patient also has a lingual orthodontic bonded wire. So we're kind of looking at that to see how we can go about applying our matrix so we can place our restoration while there is a lingual ortho retainer bar in place. So there's a little delay at this point of the video. We ended up taking the wire off and then replacing it. But I'm trying to minimize the amount of work we have to do. But at the end of the day, the old saying of penny wise, pound foolish is true. So here I'm just very gently removing the composite that covers the wire that is on the lingual of these teeth. We're going to not take the wire out completely, but I am going to move it out of our way. You'll see that here in a few seconds. Now with the wire out of the way, it allows us to then put a clear matrix in between these two teeth. So that's basically what I did there. We are doing selective etching. I applied the etchant only on the enamel surfaces. If you apply it only on the enamel surfaces, you're going to get the additional strength, but at the same time, you don't have the risk of over etching the dentin. If you over etch dentin, you are removing too much of the mineral content, which actually decreases the bond strength of your composite. The next step is we are going to be applying our prime and bond bonding agent. Key is to make sure you keep the area clear of moisture, and we're doing a 30-second scrub in this video on both the buccal and lingual surfaces. This is literally out of all the steps of applying a Class 4 restoration. This is the most important step. Make sure you are getting this on all the bonding surfaces, and it's important to spend a good 30 seconds on this application. Now you don't want to dry out your bonding surfaces here. You just want to apply air. If you over dry it, that can increase sensitivity for the tooth. We are using our curing light here. It is a high power curing light by Ultradent. It is 3 10-second applications. So what I'm looking at is just positioning the clear matrix. I like to use a lingual material on the lingual surface of this just to build up a thin wall so that I can apply my future layers to that lingual wall so I can build up the tooth. This patient here was an A1 shade, and I'm using an A2 shade on that lingual surface to build up basically a thin wall application. It makes a big difference, especially with these class 4s, to have something to build up against versus building up the height one layer at a time. So here I'm trying to make that layer as thin as possible, positioning the matrix with my finger, and then applying the curing light. Now each layer that goes on top of that first lingual wall is an A1 shade. So we're going to just apply thin layers, making sure that we have a good condensing to eliminate any air bubbles that could occur. So when you're building up these class 4s, if we try to apply too much material, and then when you're at the end and you're trying to trim it back, you'll notice there's little air bubbles between the layers if we try to condense too much at once. Each additional layers here are extremely thin. I'm concentrating mostly on the line angle here, trying to get that condensing on the surface, also the line angles. At this point, it's thinner is better. So using the end of my plastic instrument, trying to get into that abrasure space. At this point, you can see that the tooth is taking its shape. You'll notice as I am looking at it and building up the incisal edge, I am always using my mirror to look down the long axis of the tooth. That's pretty much the biggest mistake, that when you first start doing these class 4s, you're building it up and looking at the front surface, and then it starts to look a little too bulky. So at this point here is um, you'll start to notice me as I'm trimming the buckle surface and thinning it down. I'm going to take my mirror, look down the long axis as I mentioned earlier, and compare it to the proximal tooth to make sure that the line angles match, because that's when you take a look at a tooth there, and right now tooth number 8 looks a little wider than tooth number 9, and it's the emergence profile at the distal line angle that I keep looking at. So once I've built up the mesial line, the distal line angle, I noticed that the mesial line angle has a tiny little chip, um, and need to add just a little composite to that mesial portion of number 8. Because I'm bonding mostly to composite at this step, we're going to be adding, did not do the etchant step, and I'm just applying the prime and bond to this area. We're just packing composite into that embrasure space there, and just trying to add some height to the tooth so that it matches number 9 as closely as possible. Right now I'm kind of adding composite along the whole incisal edge. I'm kind of overbuilding a bit, and we'll see in a few minutes. It kind of helps in my hands to adjust the height and to allow to have the proper curvature of the 8 and 9 so it matches as best as possible. So this is kind of, I think, a little bit of added material, a little bit of a redundancy, because I am going to be cutting some of this back. Now we're to the part of the appointment where um, we're just shaping the tooth. Um, I always tend to want to start kind of at the incisal edge, trying to get the embrasures in the right location, just getting the shape of the incisal edge. Key here is always taking that mirror and comparing it to the proximal tooth so that you get the matching of how the light reflects off of the different shape of the tooth. Especially with the anterior foreteeth, um, in my hands, what works best is the disc to get those angles correct on the incisal edge. I know there are some providers out there that just only use a thin flame. In my hands, I find the disc to be a little bit more forgiving. Notice that my first disc is the purple. In my practice, I rarely use the black disc. I tend to feel they are too aggressive and they just take way too much off. So once I get it to the approximate correct height, I switch over to the green and I do a lot of my shaping with my green disc. It's nice because to get the angles, you can really put some forces on that disc so that it kind of goes into the in between the teeth, and at the same time it doesn't do damage to the teeth. So it allows you to really take your time to get the small details in the angles. This is the key is working on the embrasures. You do not want your tooth, when you're looking from the incisal edge, to be basically a billboard that's flat. You got to work on both the mesiodistal line angles to get that curvature. And that's what I'm doing here. Um, so I'm looking down at the incisal edge, comparing it to the adjacent tooth, and working on those so that they match perfectly, as closely as possible from 8 and 9. And that's really what breaks how the human eye looks at these. So once again, just concentrating, trying to get the angulation there. It's a little too thick towards the incisal edge, so I'm going in there with my green and thinning it very slowly. We're starting to fine tune our polish. I always start when I do my fine tuning of the polish with the pink disc. I turn the water off, and then I have the assistant just blowing a little bit of water and air just to keep the surface clean. Now with this patient's teeth, apologize for the cotton rolls there. Hers are mostly smooth. There is a little bit of texture that's not being picked up by the camera. I love these. These are by purchase this through Clinician's Choice. It's Henry Schein purchases them. We purchase them through Henry Schein. They do a nice job at doing the final polish on it. At this point here, right at that distal line angle, their tooth looks a little too wide. So I'm kind of going in and working on the embrasure spaces just to give that tooth more of a matching look to the adjacent tooth. At this point, what I'm doing is just putting the orthodontic wire back in position. I did not remove all the bonding on the lingual of the tooth, so the wire is attached and there's a little groove in the original composite that the wire sits in. So I'm just putting that back into position, and we're going to do our bonding, and I'm just going to use a little bit of a basically a flowable composite that does have pretty good reinforcement by weight to give it the strength that it needs. So once again, bond. And this is our flowable composite that I like to use in my office to attach the ortho bars. This is just the portion of the appointment where we're just checking and rechecking the bite. Looking at the lingual bar just to make sure we're not hitting on that too hard. And just spending time here using a finishing diamond along with a whole variety of finishing and polishing disc, because patients tend to notice every little rough edge on the lingual surface of their anterior teeth. And at this portion of the appointment, lots of polishing and making sure that the lingual surface doesn't bother the patient. And we are wrapping up here. So overall, unfortunately, with our video camera work here, doesn't really give it justice, but patient was very happy with the final results. The bright light is from my loops. Unfortunately, the camera kind of washed out a little bit, but very good color match. Patient didn't even notice the differences. So that is our class 4 restoration that we placed here at Drew's Dental Services. Thank you.